see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here today with Lesley Grant, and thank you, Lesley, for joining me for this dialogue.
I'm really glad to be part of this. I'm very excited that you're working with building a culture of empathy and compassion. I think it's wonderful that people in this time have this kind of connection online, person to person, so that people without large programs or lots of money can actually talk to each other about creating a culture of empathy and compassion.
Yeah, it's great to have this technology now that we can connect with each other and see each other. And you know, I just kind of came, I actually just came back from Harbin Hot Springs. So I've been in the hot tubs, you know, sitting and really kind of relaxing. And we had talked about getting together right after one of these, being at the retreat. And I think you were at a retreat too,
yeah.
And just being all mellow, you know, so we can kind of connect from this mellow place. So where did you just come back from?
I just came from a mindfulness meditation retreat. And mindfulness is a lot of what we do in our program, mindfulness and loving kindness practice. And yeah, it was wonderful. So I was really glad to be here, yeah.
Well, I have on the page here your website. You have a website. Let me bring that up. It's mindfulnesseducation.org.
Yes, and our program's called Marin Mindfulness, and we're a cooperative for parents, children, and for teachers, too, to be learning and practicing mindfulness. And then we also do some special programs for psychotherapists who are interested in working with mindfulness with their clients, and for educators, administrators, people like that who are, and sometimes collaborative lawyers, actually, too. We're starting to work with people who are trying to do to work with couples who are separating, but are really trying to do that in a harmonious, compassionate, sane way. And to help, we're building some mindfulness materials for couples to work with what we call applied mindfulness in dyads. In other words, to be able to communicate together using mindfulness, and mindfulness practices for the children too in that situation. We work within our program lots couples and families in lots of situations, but there's a particular need when couples are separating to to establish a kind of harmonious and compassionate atmosphere where there can be understanding in difficult circumstances.
And I see you're also the director of the center.
I founded it, and I
directed.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. And I saw there was on the front page there was you know, photos of adults and children. So it looks like it covers the whole spectrum of ages and.
Absolutely. One of the unique things about our program is just what you're saying, that we have evening mindfulness programs for parents that families sign up as a package. So parents don't just send their children. Parents come and do their own mindfulness practice. They have a group where they meet just with the parents to do both mindfulness and what we call parenting inquiry. We ask parents to look inwardly and explore some things about their own feelings, thoughts, and even their bodily sensations and breathing, to practice mindfulness, but also to reflect on difficult situations that might happen with their child, and to use mindfulness as a way to connect with their own experience so that they become unveiled, in a sense, from their own experience and are able to see their children more clearly. So you could call that self-empathy. So we're helping parents have self-empathy so that then they can have more empathy and clear seeing with their children. And then we also have children's programs. It starts with an early childhood cooperative. And that is 4 days a week. And young children, preschool age, come. And they have a little bit of mindfulness and what we call story yoga. They do yoga postures, asanas, animal forms to a story that's being told. And they listen to a bell and practice mindfulness of sounds. They practice mindfulness of breathing in short doses that work for children in a playful, open way. We also have them work with mindfulness of feelings by, for example, we might say to the children, let your mind be like the ocean. And they listen to a bell and relax into that open space. And then we'll say, what's in your ocean? And the child might say, there's a fish. We take turns. So they might say, there's a kitty at the edge of the ocean. Then we might say, well, what is that? What does that kitty have a color? Does it have a feeling? So let's say the child said a fish. It might be a red anglerfish that they have. And then I might say, and how does that anglerfish move? And the child might move like that. And we'd all follow that child moving like that. And then the child, when they're ready, rings a bowl bell and everybody sits still and we see if we can let that anglerfish swim through us. So what we're teaching with the young children, part of what we're teaching is expression and containment of feeling and the ability to recognize and have a way of speaking about it that works for children. Picture consciousness works really well. So the children are learning to empathize and love that anglerfish that's swimming through, to give empathy to themselves. Parents are learning that in their group. Parents, then children also have lots of time for free play and other things that children do, stories and plays and puppet shows. Parents, meanwhile, the parents come on a rotating basis once a month. So each parent comes once a month and they sit and practice mindfulness in a separate room for the children, from the children during the early childhood program. So they're sitting doing their mindfulness practice or their loving kindness practice. And then they have like a half-day retreat sort of for themselves where they do several sessions of mindfulness, and they also do some mindful cooking of food for us and dishwashing and bringing mindfulness to daily life. And then sitting with us for meals with the children. So the parents both have a practice of mindfulness that's inner and contemplative in their own space, and also a mindfulness of feelings, sensations, experience while they're in the group with the children to help bring mindfulness practice home. And then after children are finished with the preschool program and they're elementary school age, we have an elementary school students program where they can continue in an afternoon program and camps to practice mindfulness. We have a 9-week camp now in the summer.
Well, I might just mention, I mean, the dialogue is kind of around how do we build a culture of empathy and compassion. And what you really have, I think, in the center is kind of the nuts and bolts of how you go about doing that. You're starting with kind of a self-empathy practices where you create ways of connecting to oneself, to one's inner feelings, and kind of going deeper and creating more calmness so that we can, bring up these feelings. And then I heard you were kind of going into the relationship empathy where, say, someone has a feeling, they bring it up, and then you have like an exercise of mirroring that feeling. So which is really about kind of mirror neurons. You're kind of playing with mirror neurons, and the person feels seen for what it is that they're doing. So
absolutely, yeah. So the children, yes, when the children are, for example, moving as the anglerfish, and then everybody moves the way they move, there's a kind of mirroring going on and being seen. And with the parents, they share with each other in dyads and listen to each other. So there's also that receptive side. With the elementary school children, one of the things that we do that's kind of fun, after they've done some mindfulness of breathing and worked with feelings and gotten comfortable working with their own feelings and listening to each other, we take them out on a walk to get pizza in the evening in town. And we ask them to look for different things, different weeks. One week we might ask them to look for acts of kindness. Do they see acts of kindness? How many do they see? One week we might have them look and see, do they see people who look like they're sad or having a difficult time? And can they notice that? And then we talk about that. We go quietly to do that so they're mindful of watching other people. And then when we gather for pizza, we talk about what they've seen. So one interesting thing that happened is that the children sign up for a year program, the elementary school children, and they've all been with me in preschool too. But at the beginning of the year, going on the walk to pizza, they saw an average of about 7 acts of kindness on the way to and from pizza. At the end of the year, they saw almost 60 acts of kindness as an average. So I asked them, I said, do you think that's because people are kinder, or are you seeing it more? What do you think? And they said, well, maybe both, because they might be seeing it more. They might be more mindful of that. But they also felt that they were smiling more because they had been practicing mindfulness so much, and it was making them happy, and loving kindness practice, and they felt connected with people, so that maybe their smiling was bringing kindness to happen around them. So that was their elementary school thinking about it. So yes, we're very interested in empathy and compassion. Mindfulness practice in the neuroscience now is what it's showing is that this prefrontal cortex actually thickens as people practice mindfulness, and that area of the brain is known to be associated with empathy, compassion, executive function, a number of wonderful capacities of human beings. So the mindfulness practice, in some way that I don't think neuroscience completely understands yet, is mindfulness practice is actually physiologically supporting the development of empathy and compassion.
Well, one thing I like to do in these dialogues is I like to play with metaphors.
Yes.
I find sometimes it's a way of kind of setting up a pictorial image of empathy. And empathy is often described as standing in someone else's shoes or seeing through someone else's eyes. And someone I just interviewed recently, they said empathy is like a spa, going to the spa, which I just came back from, right? So you get all this massaging and, you know, hot and cold water treatment. You kind of start getting more relaxed and more into your body. So for you, do you have like a metaphor of what is empathy like to you, or compassion? I don't know if they're the same to you or different, or if you have two metaphors.
I was thinking about this because you actually did tell me ahead that this was one of the things you were interested in your project of looking at developing a culture of empathy and compassion. And as I was sitting on it, my cat jumped on my bed, and he was kind of in the way of my computer, and I was a little bit irritated with him, I noticed. And I picked him up, maybe not as gently as I could have, and moved him, and he hissed and put out his claws, and I was surprised, and my first reaction, I noticed, was to be annoyed with him. And then I noticed when I held him that he had this big gash on the side of his body. And then I felt in my heart that annoyance evaporate. And I felt something like because I was doing this reflection in order to do this interview with you, I was really attuned, okay, what's happening to me now with my own mindfulness? And I felt it was like a teardrop at my heart. It was like a drop, of like, oh, this is my sweet kitty, and he's in pain, and I had just picked him up roughly, and I hadn't known. And so the anger evaporated, and the empathy for his suffering, for his place, and then I noticed as I kind of held him and calmed him down, that sense of the drop of the heart opened into a broader space of, care, compassion, okay, and then a space of empathy for him, and then reflection, okay, what do I want to do? Clean the wound. What do we need to do for him? So as I was looking at that, I was really feeling how that is a metaphor for me for empathy, that it's like a drop at the heart, often how it starts, and that a drop, just like a drop of water or a teardrop, would reflect what's around it. That empathy has that reflective or mirroring quality. We're knowing, we're feeling with. And that there are different degrees. We can be touched. It can open up more like water, and like water, like if you and I are in a pool together and I push the water, it's going to move over toward you. Or if you push the water, it's going to move over toward me. In the same way, the feeling has a kind of watery quality as it moves from as it moves us emotionally. And in that way, it's like water. And in the same way, also, there's something in that metaphor to me that speaks about our commonality as human beings, that in some way we're of the same water. We're like waves in the same water. And at some deeper level, there's a connectedness, a commonality in being part of the same ocean. So to me, that is a metaphor for compassion. When empathy gets stuck, it's like frozen water. It's like an ice cube. It has that kind of hard. I think we all know that, both the experience of empathy and the experience of our heart being hardened and not being able to connect with that. So there's this kind of freeze that happens. The other thing I was thinking of in terms of images, metaphors, is that in order to be a balanced person and really have empathy and compassion over the long haul, to really sustain our ability to have a heart that can be touched and moved and have empathy, it takes not just our empathy and compassion and ability to be moved, but also our equanimity, our returning to balance. And in some way, that's like the waves coming back to the still water of a bay, or the still equanimous water, so that we can be moved and we can return to stability. And we have both of those capacities. Then I was thinking about another side of empathy is the ability to be touched by others' joy. And actually, there's a word for that in the Buddhist teachings, which is part of my background. The word is mudita. We don't really have one word for it in English, but it means joy in others' joy. And part of empathy, and I think to be balanced in empathy, is not only to be able to be touched by others' suffering, but also to be able to be touched by others' joy. And I felt that as I was feeling into what the metaphor would be for that. It's sort of like a kindling, like something kindles a fire, even a sun in our hearts. A spark goes from one to another. We watching children play. There's a way that we can empathize with another's joy, and in some sense, it's our joy.
The metaphor of the water, I wasn't quite clear on that. I was seeing when you first started talking, I have a sense of the heart.
Yes.
And then you mentioned the water, and I was almost like, was it like a water drop? That when you look in the water drop, and it reflects from all kind of directions.
Yes.
So it's kind of like looking at empathy is like looking through that water drop and just seeing kind of all of life be reflected. And it has a texture, a quality that the water also kind of moves and shifts. And is that kind of
yes, that empathy has both this element of being able to be moved and this element of, really there's like the empathy has an understanding in it, a quality of understanding, a quality of recognizing our sameness. And I was feeling that, like knowing that we could be like waves of the same water. We're waves of the same ocean. But there's also that mirroring quality in a drop of water. It's like if you looked into a water drop very carefully, like a dewdrop at the end of grass, or a drop of water, yes, you would see everything reflected around it. And if I'm empathizing with you, I'm feeling you, and I'm seeing something about your experience, and I'm open, like a clear drop, to actually recognizing what it is that you're experiencing. And actually interesting if ice doesn't do that as well. It's frozen, it's not as reflective. It's like
it becomes opaque, right? Ice kind of is.
Yeah, and so I'm not as able to reflect and know where you are or what's happening with you. Yeah.
Well, with the drop, it's also the drop reflects from 360 degrees. So I think one part of empathy is that we see others, essence or humanity, but also ours at the same time. So we're all kind of reflected within that drop. I think that's I'm kind of stretching. Is that
Yeah.
kind of?
Yes, very much so. And I think it's, what we find in our program, to go back to what it looks like for us in teaching mindfulness and loving kindness practice and compassion practice and working with that with children and parents and with ourselves as teachers, that it's really the self-empathy that allows the drop to be clear enough, less murky, so that we're actually able to see our own. For example, if you're a teacher and you're having a difficult day, or a parent and you're having a difficult day, and there's this anger or frustration or whatever's happening for you.
Which is kind of like the ice. If we the ice is the anger, the frustration, maybe, right? That's
there's a congealing. That ability to empathize tightens, and then we have some kind of an emotion that's there. And when we can, we talked about compassion, I talked about equanimity, I talked about mudita. There's a fourth in the Buddhist way of looking at it that's connected in four different sort of innate capacities of the heart you could talk about. And the fourth one is called loving kindness. And that's often traditionally in Buddhist teachings talked about as like a gentle mist that falls everywhere without discrimination. It's another water image. And in some way, when we have a difficult emotion ourselves, there's a need to see it. There's also a need to bring loving kindness to it and relate first to that. As those feelings calm down, and then you could say, I'm using different water metaphors here, but as those feelings calm down, we can see another's experience more clearly. And so that's exactly, we're really working with that. To give an example, like in the parent group, one of the practices that we do, can I give you an example?
Yeah, please.
Practice that we do. After the parents have done some mindfulness, for example, let's just do it for a minute. So be mindful of your breath going in and out. And then I would ask parents to bring to mind, and I would ask you to bring to mind, whoever's watching this, a memory of a difficult situation with either a child in your life, if you're a parent, your child, or if you're a teacher, child, or someone else in your life, a recent difficult situation. And you would bring that situation to mind. And you would notice what you recall in that situation about your own sensations, your breathing, your feelings. What was happening for you there? And just bringing that to your mind, letting that be clear, seeing what it was that was happening for you in that situation. And then in your reflection to notice what was happening in the conditions in the situation. In other words, whatever it was that isn't you or your child, like, where are you? Are you in the store? Are you at home? Are you at the child's school picking them up? Where are you? And who else is present? What are the conditions? What are the external, what situation is it, pickup time? Whatever it is. It's the second thing. And the third thing would be to notice your child in this situation that was difficult for you. What is their feeling and intention? What's your experience of that? And get a sense of that, of your child's feeling and intentions. And once we have all three of those things, our own feelings, sensations, and experience and memory of that, the conditions that are present, and the child's experience, then we would invite parents to share that with another person, to actually talk about that, to describe those three things. And we'd have the listener, we'd put them in pairs, in dyads. We'd have the listener listen. Could they hear those three parts? Could they hear what the person was feeling and experiencing themselves? Could they hear and empathize with what the situation was? Maybe it was a difficult or stressful situation just by the situation itself. What was the person's child, intending and feeling? Then once they have been heard, we invite both people in the dyad to close their eyes and invite compassion for all three aspects, for their own sensations, feelings, and thoughts, for the situation itself, maybe other people in the situation if it's many other people present, and for their child's feelings and intentions. Once they've done that, we asked that they open to see if they have any insights about the situation, any new understanding about themselves, about their child, about the situation that they were in, and if they would like to share that with the other partner that they're working with. Then we teach this as a practice for parents, both to do in our parent group, but also to do with their spouse or with a co-parenting spouse. And very deep things happen between parents, new understandings of themselves, their relationship with their child, their partner's relationship with their child, new empathy for everybody involved. And also parents become able to see their children more clearly through this process. So it's a practice. That's an example of the kind of thing we do.
Yeah, I followed along with it as you were talking. I had a real situation with my nephew kind of beating up on my other nephew, and one of them was a little bit of a bully. But the sensation I get is kind of a stilling of the water, you know, of that drop. It's instead of being kind of wavy and choppy, which is, you know, choppy water is sometimes maybe hard to see the full reflection, it did kind of create more of a calmness. And I didn't see, I felt that calmness, but I still didn't have the resolution. For me, it's like, how do you, when, you know, one child is kind of beating up on the other,
yes,
you know, how do I mean, for me, that's like anxiety, you know,
absolutely
riddening, and I could feel my own anxiety, and, you know, I'm wanting to find some kind of an empathic way of restoring connection and kind of teaching that as well for them.
Absolutely. Well, that's the next, it's interesting you say that, because that's the next step with parents. When we do this with parents, they have a longer time to do this process. I went through it rather quickly. So sometimes people do have insights. There's also one of the things this practice does, and one of the reasons we ask parents to separate these three things, their own experience, the situation, and the child, is that it helps parents then to be able to communicate with the child about the conditions with empathy for the whole situation. I'd like to give a little example, if that's okay. We have a couple of different, we let parents share then in the group, so I have a couple of stories. One was a man who, they had a house that they were selling. They didn't have a lot of money. They were kind of, you know, in a difficult situation about having to sell this house and get out from under their mortgage. And they had invested a lot in painting the living room, and they painted it this beautiful mint green, and, you know, gotten it staged because they really needed to sell it so that they didn't lose everything they invested in the house. It's probably a situation a lot of people can empathize with. And their young 3-year-old, who just turned 3, the dad came into the living room, and the 3-year-old was taking red crayon and drawing on the wall. And the dad, who I know this parent well, parents work with us sometimes for quite a number of years, and they'd had an older sibling in the program too, so I knew him quite well. He was a lovely person. But in his own childhood, he'd grown up in a pretty heavily abusive family, and so he would have to work with these impulses of his rage, you know, because whatever we learned and had from our parents is what we tend to have come, you know, the way it comes up. And so he said, because he'd been doing this practice, his experience really came up in this way. He felt the heat in his body, he felt his heart beating fast, he felt his breathing getting short, he felt like he was turning red, and he felt his rage. And because he was so mindful of it, there was some way that allowed him to see, to move into the next part of the process, which was, you know, in the moment, in a flash this happened, he said, to see that his child had no concept of a staged house and a living room and tight money, you know, and he could see that, he could feel it, he could empathize, and that his child was actually in this great joy drawing on the wall. And so instantly this kind of empathy for the whole thing came up. Now, he still needed to talk to the child about the conditions with compassion, and what he found himself saying is crayons are for paper, taking his hand, showing him the paper, and then having him take a sponge and try to help clean the wall and saying, we don't draw on the wall. And, you know, they had to repaint eventually. But for him, it was this moment for the dad of really seeing, oh, this works. You know, I have a kind of impulse control that happens, that I have. It's as if the compassion for myself gives me this spaciousness for my own experience, so I don't just react. Another dad who also has a background of some, you know, people, I often meet parents with really wonderful intentions, but who have this lineage of abuse or limit setting that happened in their family violently in ways that they don't want to do. And they're very clear they don't want to, but in a moment of stress comes up. And this dad, who's also a lovely dad, talked about his 3-year-old and having picked her up in a moment of rage and being about to scream at her about something she was doing that had really annoyed him. And that he suddenly felt his arms, felt his breathing, felt his anger, saw how little she was. So he had this empathy of seeing, like suddenly he could see her clearly, put her down gently. And that for him, this practice helped him do it. So I think that mindfulness, loving kindness practice, and applied mindfulness, the kind of exercises I was just showing you, can help prevent child abuse. So when you're talking about that, or even things that wouldn't be called child abuse, but promote a kind of violent response to things, we can really, as teachers and as parents, through these practices, learn to support children. And I mean, then that talks about bringing it to the next generation. So it's really the foundation in that sense as well, that parents who learn mindfulness practice develop the capacity to support the growth of children who seek creative, nonviolent solutions to problems. So we're really interested in this foundation, in what does it look like if parents really can work with their own emotions and feelings so that their parenting becomes more skillful. And then at the same time, we're also working with the children. And some of our children actually go through preschool, elementary school, and even have come back as teens to help with the program. So we really are teaching all ages.
Mm-hmm. So you're teaching this, the parents are starting to embody it, and they're passing it on to the children, and it'll be like a new generation of more mindful and empathic and compassionate, kind of a cause and effect through into the future.
And we're teaching teachers. I would like to see, we're a mindfulness cooperative. We took a regular children's co-op, which is something very known in our culture, children's cooperative, where parents come on a rotating basis to help with children in preschool. And basically, I had been teaching parenting classes to help parents learn how to talk to children. And at a certain point, I said to them, you know, if you really want to learn this, about half of what I'm doing comes from mindfulness practice. Are you interested? And the parents were interested. So I was trained to do that. I've practiced mindfulness for about 35 years. And I was authorized as a teacher through some of the senior teachers at Spirit Rock Center. And so I began teaching parents. And then I offered an additional afternoon program for children who might want to learn it, and everybody signed up their children. So I thought, oh, this is really happening. And then we extended it, and we teach it in a very, in a way that people from lots of different backgrounds, you don't have to be Buddhist or particular tradition. Mindfulness, like love or faith, doesn't belong to any particular group or religion. Mindfulness is just part of what we are as human beings, part of our human capacity, as is empathy and compassion.
Yeah, from what you're describing, it sounds very accessible, that anyone can do it. One question I had is about, you're talking a little bit about your history. Is there a moment where you kind of discovered or really saw the power of empathy? Was there some kind of a, like an aha moment, or even a couple aha moments in stories that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. This is a very good question. I began practicing mindfulness when I was quite young, in my teens. And one of the first insights I had, well, for one thing, I was practicing mindfulness and loving kindness practice, which is another practice we teach where we focus kind thoughts on ourselves. May I be happy? May I be peaceful? May I have ease of well-being? There are different versions. May I be safe and protected? And then we send that with a feeling at the heart. We say those phrases to ourselves silently, and we also have a felt sense of ourselves. Then we focus on someone we know, and we do the same thing and send that to them. So we develop this loving kindness. Well, I was beginning to learn to practice that in my early times, and I was a young, kind of college-age person who had lived in a household of people, had housemates. And they said, you come back from these loving kindness retreats and you're angry a lot. Why are you doing this? I said, I don't know, but I just have to do it. And I began to see that, oh, I see, I need to send the loving kindness to the anger, to the difficult emotions. And I began to discover, and not in a way of trying to push them away either, in a way of making room for them and actually receiving them into my heart. And that by doing that, I was kind of an angry type, actually, by personality, and I became less angry all around by doing that. It really helped me. Or when anger would arise, it's not that anger stopped arising, but that my heart had a way of holding it, had a way of making room for it, that allowed that anger to dissolve back into the nature of my own heart, is how I feel it. And so that was a kind of epiphany. The other early epiphany was, people have been talking about this for thousands and thousands of years. Everybody has this kind of mind. Everybody. That it isn't just what I was used to thinking of as just my little mind. I have this feeling, I have this feeling. It's kind of my territory. That common humanity insight was one of the early insights I had with this kind of practice, that we all have this. And I often, when I'm teaching parents, one of the things I say, because parents come in really sad about their anger and hateful, sometimes even feelings at their children, that, oh, I'm such a bad parent. And the relief of understanding everybody has that. The question is, what do we do with that? Although, what do we do with that? How do we receive that, allow that, let that move through without having to go into speech and action that's going to be harmful? Of course, we need to set limits sometimes, and we need to be firm with children, absolutely. But we can do that from a place of empathy and compassion. So these were, insights early on for me that, another one is I was talking about being angry early on and realizing, oh, wow, there's all this anger in my mind, which in some way I'd almost been unconscious of before. I was busy trying to be a nice person, but underneath this anger, And it's like, what I learned was, oh, I see, the more room I make to actually feel that, instead of trying to get rid of it, the more it has room to transform. So.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing this, the insight is that when you're feeling your own anger, that you're kind of bringing a presence. You start bringing a presence to it instead of like trying to suppress it or avoid it.
Yes.
You're just kind of trying to be present.
Or act it out.
Or act it out. Uh-huh.
So that there's this other space. I think that was one of my early insights, is that there actually was a way to create this inner space for feeling that didn't involve acting it out, nor did it involve suppressing it. But it actually allowed it to release like an energy. And with parents, I'll often say things like, the way to prevent child abuse is really to feel it, to feel even the impulse in your arm that wants to hit or hurt. It's actually to allow yourself to feel it so that it releases in the field of your own compassionate awareness, rather than become and of course, as parents, there are times when you're going to speak sharply or yell with your children. It's almost impossible to avoid that completely. Parenting's really difficult and pushes buttons. But parents develop a capacity to respond in a much clearer way to children, to really see the children, which is what you're really talking about with empathy, to really see them, to actually see them. Because a lot of times, so much is happening in parenting. There's so much to do and get done, and everything's happening, that parents report, it's hard. I also raised a goddaughter, so I've done parenting too. It's hard to see the child. And what we're doing is helping to clear our own heart so that seeing is clearer.
Do you have an actual story of when that happened? Like, do you remember like the situation where you were at when you noticed that about the fear? I mean, were you like in the doing the training, or was it coming home from the
I
training?
came home and I was at the kitchen table with one of my housemates. And she said, "You're always so annoyed coming home from these retreats." And in trying to explain to her why I needed to work with this and why it was actually changing me, even though it didn't look like that yet, it made me aware that that I it made me aware of my outside, for one thing, empathetic with the people. I was, maybe 19, empathetic with the people around me, that I was still acting this way because I'd sort of started to work with it inside, but I hadn't really worked with it outside yet. So I think that was part of my epiphany about it. And then another example that one of my teachers, Jack Kornfield, would talk about a lot, that maybe some people may have heard, is about a bull. If you put a raging bull in a small pen, it would break it apart. But if you put it in a big pasture, it has a lot of room. So that was another one that I think that image helped me have the sense of, okay, I'm making a big internal space. Yeah.
Yeah, but for me, what you're saying right there has a real poignancy about, it's kind of like going to the anger.
Yes.
Instead of trying to suppress it, or maybe indulge in it or something, it's kind of like being present with it, and that quality of it transforming and kind of giving it space. I had a similar experience in the kind of the freestyle dance that I do, but this was around fear, and which I think was the same thing, where I was kind of just feeling the fear within myself, and I'll tend to avoid it or try to do it. But I said, well, I just want to go to it and be as present as possible with it and really let it expand in my body to the degree that it wants to, or actually I wanted to make it expand, to get closer to it. And I found that as it expanded, it almost like dissipated, it's almost like just disappeared. Mm-hmm. And then another fear would arise that had a whole different, might be more of an anxiety, broad, kind of a heaviness of the head, and I kind of got close to it, was present, and it would kind of just dissolve away. And I found that within, a few, 5-10 seconds, a new one, because I was actually looking for them. I said, let me go find them in the room with the other dancers. I want to get close to your fear. I want to really feel the essence of it. Yeah. So it seems that there's something about that at an experiential level of bringing ourselves to the anger, like you're saying, to the fear. Yes. And I kind of see, for me, that's empathy, which is kind of being present. Yes. And I've seen from my, there's a lot of people ask about compassion. What's the difference between compassion and empathy? And for me, compassion is doing that, but doing it towards suffering. Yes. Kind of bringing our presence towards people's suffering. Yes. Yes. And kind of what happens when we kind of have that kind of interaction. Yes. So I don't know how that resonates, but I think that's a very critical part to this, is just exactly what you were talking about, is that bringing that presence and expanding expansion. Yes. And what I see is that then even in the children, for example, that they become, both parents and children become more attuned to each other's suffering. Parents will say, like one parent told me that they were driving the car on a very stressful day. It's a little example. And their two preschool-age children, 3 and 4, were in the back seat in their car seats. And, a lot was going on, and the cell phone calls were coming in, and it was very stressful. And the mom had stopped and realized she had her cell phone in the trunk and stopped at the light and ran in the back to get the trunk and come back in the car. And her 2 children were in the back doing mindful breathing. This sounds like a small thing, but I had suggested to them that if parents were stressed, a way they could help mom or dad was to just do a little mindful breathing. And the mom knew that, so she felt cared for, so they're learning. I have another story about a child working with anger that might be interesting. This is a 4.5-year-old who had a lot of impulse control issues when he first came to us and was considered as somewhat of a special needs child. And one day, he and a 3-year-old in the preschool program were making a little puppet show story and putting up
trees and houses and making a story. And the younger child started knocking things down. And we had done this exercise before about the mind like the ocean and the fish I talked with you about. And he, so he had that kind of template in his heart. But anyway, the child was knocking things down. And instead of hitting or grabbing something, he said, my anglerfish is here. My anglerfish is here. And I said, oh, your anglerfish is here. What's that like? And suddenly, instead of him just lashing out as he would have, he was really in this feeling experience, interest experience. And I said, what's that like? And he said, anglerfish wants to drink up all the water. And to me, this was really beautiful. This was like an insight. It's like, isn't it like that? Doesn't anger want to take up all the clarity of our mind, drink up the water of our clarity? It just is an energy. That's kind of how it works. And I said, yeah, it feels like that. And after we sat with that for a moment, I said, but can the fish drink up the whole ocean? And he said, no, I'm bigger than the anglerfish. Because we'd practice mind like the ocean, right? I'm bigger than the anglerfish. And there was this sense of kind of empowerment and clarity. So this is one of the things I see with children. And then he was able to say to the other child, here, you can have these trees. This is what I'm using. Join the pup show. He became clear. So there's something about this kind of self-empathy with feeling that gives the capacity to have clarity. And then he treated the other child with more gentleness. So even at that preschool age, you can see that. It's like once he, instead of just lashing out of frustration, he was suddenly seeing that. And it's one of the things we really see in our classroom. And actually, I think in some of the the research with children and mindfulness is a very early stage, but some of the early indications are that and some of this is anecdotal from teachers, certainly we experience it in our program, is that children begin to play more harmoniously in bigger groups because they have more attunement to each other. They're actually able to know where they are in space and the other is, and more kindness because they are seeing each other more clearly. It's the same way with children as it is for adults in that way. And so I really see that. I have another little story, which is we had a boy come into our group, and not all my stories are about boys. I just really am talking about boys a lot. It's just happening. Anyway, a boy came in, a 3-year-old who had a lot of difficult things happening at home. Some family violence had happened, big difficult separation, a lot of pain for this kid. And he came in his first day, and he came in the middle of the program year, and he was just grabbing everything off the shelves and just like kind of conflicting with everyone. And one of the older children who'd been practicing this mindfulness in our program, who was a 5-year-old, looked at that. And, I had tried to talk to the child and calm him down in various ways, but it really hadn't worked. The 5-year-old started giving the child things. He started taking toys off the shelf and saying, here you are, Jack. Here you are, Jack. And he just was piling things around. And the kid was stunned, and he sat there just going, what's happening? And all the children in the room started doing this one after another. It became this game to pile things around this kid. And I just sat and watched, with mindfulness. It was just sort of interesting. It was like somehow they had felt something in him, that they were caring about him, that they saw the woundedness in what he was doing, and they were caring about him. And what was interesting, after a while, the child with all these toys, and really basically they'd taken everything off the shelves, there was literally nothing for him to grab. And he was sitting in this pile of stuff. He started giving things back to them. Here you are, Lucy. Here you are, Susan. Here you are, Ellie. Here you are, Nathaniel, and passing things out to the children. And it was this sort of healing moment for him in the classroom. So I think there is something about a teacher's mindful intention. If you can be mindfully present with, you have to set limits in a classroom, but with what's happening, that there's a quality of presence. Even the neuroscience is talking about mirror neurons. So with a teacher, with a parent, our quality of presence actually communicates to the children and brings that kind of presence, sort of opens up their qualities of empathy and compassion. Which is part of what we're doing with the Mindfulness Cooperative. Parents are practicing on site, teachers are practicing on site. It brings that. but that the children are actually getting this. So anyway, that was another story.
Yeah, those are wonderful stories. It just to have to really see how this
Yeah.
plays out, and to build a culture of empathy. It's like what are the nuts and bolts of how to do that, and it looks like that you've really been working on all those skills, and the whole mindfulness community kind of is kind of helping support that too, and has done so much research
Yes.
and so forth. And how do we kind of like scale this up?
I'd really, well,
To
that's the piece about we're trying to, and other people are trying to teach teachers. There's a number of different programs. I mean, we're not the only one. There's a program called Mindful Schools, which is in the East Bay, that's doing mindfulness in public elementary schools in a completely secular way that works in that context. I've been and visited, and it's quite amazing. You see the children are in their classroom, and the teacher says, okay, put away your math books. It's time for your mindfulness training. And they all sit and do mindful breathing and become really present. It's beautiful what happens. I really believe, as far as I know, I haven't heard of another co-op doing quite what we're doing, and I'd love this idea to spread. And I'm very open to being contacted by teachers who'd like, some support in people need to be, a teacher needs to be trained in mindfulness first and be ready to teach mindfulness. But there are people who are in that situation or who could get that training, who have both the early childhood expertise. For us, it's been great to start at this early level and then be able to build it into elementary school. You can teach children in elementary school, and it's wonderful. There is something wonderful about starting young, and they're kind of coming into it from the preschool age up. And for families, because they're just establishing their ways of being as a family. So if you can help a family learn these skills when children are quite young, or even before children are born, parents learning mindfulness, learning compassion, learning to work with their minds in that way, then you build a context for the children from the time they're coming into the world. And in a cooperative where there's a lot of play dates, things between the families, you also create this atmosphere. So I think this is an idea I'd love to see spread all over the place, because it's really worked well for us.
Well, a part of this, there's a lot of work around mindfulness, and there's a lot from the Buddhist tradition. You mentioned Spirit Rock, and there's also kind of this empathy movement happening. There's a organization, Ashoka, that they want to, promote, kind of consciously, explicitly promote empathy training within the schools.
Yes.
And to, develop support for that. There's programs like Roots of Empathy. So it's like bringing all these different processes together to have more of a comprehensive curriculum that's kind of explicit about empathy and connection and conflict resolution and restorative justice, and see it as kind of like a whole. So I think this is
Edwin, that's part of your role, Edwin, is getting us all talking to each other.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do here. So I'm really glad to have had a chance.
Love it.
Because for me, this is like just the beginning. That these dialogues can keep going, and we can bring others together and see if we can't build a larger movement. I mean, there's already a movement out there, but if we can kind of help promote it and get people together, because there's so many other things I like to talk with you about. And there's things like the definition of empathy. There's a lot of confusion between empathy and compassion, and how does it all relate with mindfulness? And I think it's an ongoing kind of a dialogue that needs to happen. And now with this technology, we can fairly easily get together to do this.
Well, with the children, partly with empathy, what we're seeing is that their own inner practice then helps them listen more effectively. So we do lots of counsel process too, especially with the elementary school children, where they really practice listening and understanding what each other are saying, and various kinds of games where they're mirroring that back. So yes, that's definitely part of it. So yes, I guess the way I'd think of it is empathy is the larger part of empathy recognizes what another is feeling and experiencing, and then the compassion kind of moves us toward movement from that, toward but sometimes, you know, I mean, it's true. I think the two things are not completely distinct for me. They seem very related. Empathy, though, I connect, as we talked about earlier, with sympathetic joy as well. So empathy is the whole range of feelings. Whereas
yeah, it's one of the projects I want to do. Is I interviewed Dan Batson, who's one of the top academics who's been studying this, and want to get a group together to kind of make it more clear, because there's a lot of confusion about this, and just for a sense of clarity. And so that's kind of one of the many projects have kind of on the burner. But for me, I could just mention just for the definition of empathy that I'm kind of operating from.
Yes.
Is it's 4 parts to empathy. The first part is self-empathy, which I was so glad that you brought that up, which is the whole mindfulness, sensory awareness, being able to articulate the feelings that are going on, within ourselves. So it's all about kind of connecting in a more spacious way, which is, I think, is what you were talking about. The second part is the mirrored empathy, which is through mirror neurons. That as we see in action, feel in action, be it joy or creativity or whatever the feeling is, that we can mirror that through mirror neurons through each other.
Yes.
The fourth part is what I call imaginative empathy, which is, the academics call it perspective taking or cognitive empathy, which is as we have self-awareness, that we can take someone's position kind of as almost like an actor can. Like, I can put myself in your shoes and kind of know what's going on in kind of a more perspective taking. And the fourth part would be empathic action, which is that as we kind of resonate and connect with each other, we can work together in kind of this harmonious, creative process. And I see that with conflict resolution, right? There's these parties, they're totally mad at each other, and they go through this whole process of connecting with themselves, connecting with the others, taking the other perspective, and then they start working together in a harmonious, creative fashion in this kind of negotiated, smooth, way. And so that's the basic framework of empathy that I have so far, and it's still evolving. And then it's that applied to suffering, which is the compassion part. So it kind of runs parallel, self-compassion, it can be, mirrored compassion, perspective-taking compassion, and compassionate action. So that's kind of the rough understanding I have so far.
It's beautiful. I love the way that you're articulating that. I think this is a fabulous discussion that you're opening up. In this, you were talking about empathy between people who are in conflict. We really see this. Working with co-parenting couples, some of our dyads are about really helping them see each other's hurt, being able to actually just see it and retain some equanimity with themselves, but just to see it. And that being able to hold that together in empathy between parents that are separating helps them then to act together, to be able to be good co-parents, to be able to move beyond that stuckness that they have around often wanting to be seen by each other in how hurt they were, and not being able to see each other, and so being occluded, being blocked from seeing in their parenting, seeing clearly. So so on so many levels.
So this is a lifelong endeavor for the rest of my life, at least. So I'm really glad to have met you and connected with you. This is just so delightful to have had this chance to talk with you. And I know you need to go, and we've been going for about an hour or so. Thank you so much for taking a part in this, and we'll have another one of these dialogues at some point as well.
Thank you so much for your good work. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Really.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, take care. Then we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye, Lesley.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.